I was halfway through building my dream shed when it all started. It was a Saturday morning, the sun was out, and I had my music playing while I mounted the last wall panel. Then she came stomping across my lawn in leopard print flats and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, and she was the president of the Maple Ridge HOA, a neighborhood I didn't even live in. I looked up from my drill as she marched right up to me like she owned the county. "You can't build that here," Patricia barked. "It violates HOA policy. Structure placement must be approved and 5 feet from all property lines." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what HOA?" She tapped her clipboard like it was the Constitution. "Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. This whole block falls under our jurisdiction." "No, it doesn't," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. "This property isn't part of your subdivision. I checked that before I bought it. I'm not in any HOA." Patricia's eyes narrowed like I'd insulted her personally. "We've recently extended our boundary. Your house is included now. You'll need to stop work immediately and submit a compliance form." I laughed. "You don't get to just draw lines and suck people in. That's not how this works." She puffed up like a blowfish. "You'll be fined $500 per day until it's removed, and if you don't comply, we'll take legal action." I didn't say anything else. I just turned around, picked up my drill, and finished the wall. That Monday, I got a letter in the mail, official HOA letterhead, a list of violations, and a warning of legal action. I tossed it in the nonsense drawer and went back to work, but Patricia wasn't done. Over the next week, I caught her sneaking around my backyard twice, once peeking over the fence with a camera, once flat out walking through my garden like she was casing the place. The second time I confronted her. "You're trespassing," I said. "I've got cameras." "Do it again and I'll call the sheriff." "I'm gathering documentation," she snapped. "You'll regret ignoring HOA directives." I installed 2 more motion cameras that night, one on the shed and one pointing at the front gate. Then came the citation from the county. Patricia had filed a formal complaint, claiming I was in violation of local zoning ordinances. I had to show up for a hearing. I walked into that hearing armed with satellite maps, property line records, and the original purchase agreement that clearly stated, "No HOA affiliation." Patricia showed up in a floral blazer and a binder that looked like it hadn't been opened since 1994. The judge took one look at my documents, raised an eyebrow, and asked, "Ma'am, do you have any legal documentation showing this property is under your HOA's jurisdiction?" Patricia flipped through her binder like she was searching for a golden ticket. "We've had discussions about expanding our boundary," the judge cut her off. "Discussions aren't binding. Unless you've filed an amendment with the county and had it approved, this gentleman is not under your HOA." She tried to argue, but the judge had already stamped the ruling, complaint dismissed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, someone spray-painted "violation" across the side of my shed in big red letters. That's when I knew this wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was personal. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. I didn't touch the spray paint. I left it exactly as it was, took high-res photos from 6 angles, and uploaded the footage from my front gate camera. It caught a blurry figure in a windbreaker creeping around in the early morning. I couldn't make out a face, but the way they moved, hurried but deliberate, told me it wasn't just some random vandal. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I drove straight to the sheriff's department. Not the front desk. I asked to speak directly with Deputy Rourke, a guy I'd met once before when I was getting permits handled for a fence installation. He was level-headed, the kind of guy who didn't brush off property damage as just a neighborhood dispute. He leaned back in his chair after watching the footage twice. "Could be criminal mischief," he said. "But if you're suggesting this is coming from your neighbor's HOA, we'd need something stronger than a hunch." "I've got more than a hunch," I said. "I've got a pattern." I handed him a file I'd started assembling printouts of every letter, photos of Patricia on my property, timestamps, even the date of the zoning complaint. Each incident lined up with me refusing to bow to their demands. The spray paint, that was next level. Rourke gave a low whistle. All right, I'll assign someone to look into it, but if this gets bigger, you'll want to talk to the county attorney. The next morning, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. Community meeting, emergency session. All residents of Maple Ridge and surrounding homes encouraged to attend. I almost laughed. Encouraged? This wasn't encouragement, this was bait. I showed up half an hour early and sat in the back of the clubhouse, while Patricia and two other board members rearranged folding chairs and whispered to each other like middle schoolers plotting a prank. The moment the clock hit 7, Patricia strode to the front like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. "We've gathered this evening," she said, "due to a growing concern about non-compliant structures near the perimeter of our community." The room was mostly quiet. A few people nodded. Most looked confused. She gestured to a set of printed photos taped to a foam board. "This shed, constructed without HOA approval, presents a visual inconsistency with our neighborhood aesthetic. Though the property is not formally enrolled in our HOA, we consider its proximity to be influential." Someone in the front raised a hand. "Isn't that outside our jurisdiction?" Patricia's smile was tight. "We're in the process of proposing annexation. The county allows for neighborhood expansion under certain conditions." I stood up before she could say another word. "Patricia, you can't misrepresent the law to pressure people. I'm not under your HOA, you have no authority over my property. And since you mentioned influence, let's talk about the influence of red spray paint." A murmur rippled through the room. Patricia flinched. "We're not here to point fingers, that's a separate matter entirely." "No, it's not," I said. "Because I've got footage of someone trespassing the night before the vandalism, and I've handed it over to the sheriff. So if anyone else wants to avoid getting dragged into that investigation, now might be a good time to distance yourselves." One man stood up and left. A woman followed shortly after. The room's energy shifted, uncertainty sliding into discomfort. Patricia tried to regain control. "We're only trying to maintain property values. The board has a responsibility, you have a responsibility to your members," I interrupted. "Not to harass neighbors you don't control, not to file false complaints, and definitely not to incite vandalism." She stepped back from the podium, her jaw tight, but she didn't say anything else. The meeting ended without the vote they were clearly hoping for. 2 days later, I got a call from Deputy Rourke. "You were right," he said. "We ran a match on the shoes visible in your footage. One of the HOA board members reported a pair stolen last month, claimed they disappeared from her porch. Turns out they were in her mudroom closet the whole time. Same tread pattern, consistent with the spray paint distance." "Which board member?" "Name's Dana. Treasurer. We pulled cell tower data. She pinged off a tower near your property around 4 a.m. the day of the vandalism." "That's enough for a warrant." The HOA's treasurer got arrested for trespassing and property damage that afternoon. It hit the local news by evening. I thought the fallout would make Patricia back off. I underestimated how far someone like her was willing to go. The next week, I got a notice from the county tax assessor's office. My property had been flagged for irregular development, a phrase as vague as it was ominous. I called the office, and after an hour of transfers, I finally got someone who admitted the complaint had come from a local neighborhood council. I asked for the documentation. What I got in return was a scanned letter signed by Patricia herself, complete with a fake HOA letterhead and a list of made-up code violations: improper drainage, unlicensed construction, and invasive visual obstruction. I drove straight to the county clerk's office with my permits in hand. The woman at the desk took one look at the paperwork and sighed. "Second time this month," she muttered, flipping through the file. "They've been submitting these on multiple properties lately, trying to stir things up before the annual zoning update." I asked if I could file a formal complaint. She handed me a form and said, "If you've got evidence of coordinated false reporting, you might want to talk to the DA's office. That's not just harassment, that's fraud." By the end of the week, I was sitting across from Assistant District Attorney Carla Nguyen. I showed her everything: the forged letters, the fake violations, the footage, the meeting flyer, even the treasurer's arrest report. She listened without interrupting, then leaned forward and said, "If the HOA board acted as a unit to submit false reports to a government entity, that's a felony. And if they used HOA funds to do it, we're looking at misappropriation charges too." I asked what came next. "We'll need a full audit of their financials. If they've stepped outside the scope of their bylaws, we'll find it." What I didn't expect was how fast it moved after that. Turns out, one of the board members, a guy named Elliot, had resigned quietly a month earlier. I found him in the parking lot after one of the zoning meetings and asked if he'd be willing to talk. He glanced around and said, "Off the record, I left because Patricia started using HOA funds for things that didn't have board approval. Legal consultations, courier services, surveillance equipment. Surveillance," she bought a drone, said it was to monitor property lines. "I saw her flying it over your yard once." That was enough for the DA's office to subpoena their financial records. What they found made the treasurer's arrest look like a parking ticket: tens of thousands in misused funds. Personal purchases disguised as community improvements. Equipment bought without board votes. And worst of all, attempts to rewrite the HOA charter without a formal vote from members. The county filed charges within 2 weeks. Patricia was arrested for fraud, criminal misrepresentation, and conspiracy to commit property interference. The rest of the board either resigned or went silent. But the best part: the county issued a cease and desist order against Maple Ridge HOA, suspending all operations until a full audit and election could be held under third-party oversight. For the first time in months, I walked out to my shed, looked at the faded red paint that still spelled violation, and finally scrubbed it off. Not because I had to, because I'd already won. 2 weeks after the board collapsed, I came home to find a plain white envelope tucked under my front door. No postage, no return address, just my name written in blocky, uneven letters. I opened it slowly, half expecting glitter or some half-baked threat. What I found was worse. Inside was a single page photocopied. It was a zoning map, but not the real one. My property was shaded in red, labeled Pending Absorption Maple Ridge. Just below it was a typed note: "Your compliance is inevitable. Resistance only delays the process." I didn't recognize the font, but the phrasing set something off in my gut. This wasn't from the HOA. They were already under investigation. This was someone else. Someone who hadn't gotten the memo that the game was over. I checked my security feeds. Nothing. Whoever left it avoided every camera angle, even the new one I'd mounted behind a tree across the street. That told me one thing: whoever did this knew exactly where my cameras were. And that narrowed the list of suspects. I called the sheriff's office again and asked for Deputy Rourke. This time, I didn't have to explain much. He came by that afternoon and brought someone with him, a plainclothes investigator named Fields. Fields barely said a word as he examined the envelope. He wore black gloves and used a small UV flashlight to check for residue. After a few minutes, he turned to me. "Whoever delivered this has done it before," he said. "No fingerprints, no shoe impressions, no residue. They knew what not to touch. That's not amateur work." "Could it be someone from the old board?" I asked. He gave a subtle nod. "We're looking into all of them, but this leans more personal. Someone's trying to push you back into the corner." I asked if I should be worried. If they're still relying on intimidation, it means they're not ready to be seen. That's leverage. "But if this escalates, you call immediately." The next day, I met with Assistant DA Nguyen again. She updated me on the audit. The charges against Patricia were holding strong. They'd found a second set of books buried in a private Dropbox account tied to her personal email. Hidden there was a record of unauthorized payments to a consulting firm that didn't exist, at least, not legally. Money went out, Nguyen told me, but there's no trace of where it landed. We're working with financial crimes now. If the funds were laundered, we'll find the end point. I asked if the fake annexation map could be related. Nguyen didn't blink. That wasn't a scare tactic. That was a warning. Somebody still thinks they have a shot at seizing control of surrounding properties, yours specifically. We've flagged your address. If anything moves through the county office with your parcel number on it, we'll know. 2 nights later, I got a call from a neighbor down the street, Jared, a contractor who'd helped me frame the shed. He sounded rattled. Someone came by my place after midnight, he said. Didn't knock, just stood on the sidewalk staring at the house. My dog went ballistic. Did you get a look at them? Too dark. But they had something in their hand, looked like a folder or a clipboard. When I turned the porch light on, they bolted. I checked my feed from the neighborhood camera that faced his direction. There was a blur of motion and a tall figure wearing a jacket with reflective strips along the sleeves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to see they were casing homes that had helped me during the HOA fight. I forwarded the footage to Fields. He called back the next morning. We ran the pattern. 3 other homes on your block reported similar visits. No break-ins, just presence. All of them connected to your case. We think someone's trying to intimidate your support network. That's when I decided to go public. I contacted a local news outlet, Channel 4 Investigates. They'd already run a segment on the treasurer's arrest, but this was something else. I gave them the map, the footage, the envelope, and the details about the false reports. I even let them film the shed still standing, still perfectly legal. They aired the story the next evening. The headline: Phantom HOA, homeowners harassed by collapsing association. The story ran for 10 minutes. It showed the fake map, the financial audit, the DA's ongoing investigation, and at the end they aired a phone call from a whistleblower, a former HOA assistant who'd worked under Patricia for 2 years. In the recording, the assistant described secret meetings held off the books where Patricia and 2 others discussed how to reclaim the perimeter homes through community pressure, strategic citation, and county misdirection. That was the nail in the coffin. The next morning, I got a call from Nguyen. The assistant gave us access to a shared drive, she said. It had everything: meeting notes, fake draft bylaws, even a proposed annexation timeline. It was all a setup. They knew they couldn't force you in officially, so they tried to bluff you into compliance. And when that failed, they escalated. I asked how deep it went. They weren't just using HOA funds, they were routing them through shell companies. One of them links back to Patricia's cousin in Arizona. We're filing additional charges next week. By the end of the month, Patricia was hit with 3 new felony counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and falsification of municipal documents. The treasurer took a plea deal and turned over her email archives, hundreds of messages, planning, coordinating, and green-lighting the campaign against non-compliant outsiders. But here's what really turned the tide. The county council launched a formal review of Maple Ridge's charter. They found that the HOA had been operating outside its legally defined borders for over 6 years. Several properties had been wrongly fined, cited, and coerced into compliance without ever being under the HOA's legal umbrella. The county nullified every fine issued outside the official boundary. Residents who had paid under pressure were offered refunds. And a class action lawsuit began to take shape, led by none other than Jared, who'd gotten a citation for a trailer parked on his own land 3 years prior. I wasn't part of the lawsuit. I didn't need to be. My fight had already flipped the table. One afternoon, I walked down to the mailbox and saw something that made me stop cold. A white SUV with tinted windows was parked across the street. The engine was off. The driver just sat there, staring forward, not looking at me, not looking away, just... Still, I didn't go inside. I didn't call anyone. I walked straight across the street, stopped 5 feet from the driver's window, and waited. 30 seconds passed. Then the window rolled down. A woman in her 50s sat behind the wheel. She wore a pressed blouse and a scarf tied tight around her neck. Her eyes were sharp but tired. I didn't recognize her. "You made a lot of noise," she said. "You looking for someone?" I asked. "I was on that board," she said. "Briefly, I resigned before the audit, but I saw what you did. Thought I'd see it for myself." I didn't reply, I just watched her. She looked back at the shed. "They thought you'd fold." Patricia always counted on fear, never expected someone to stand their ground. "Then she underestimated the neighborhood," I said. The woman gave a faint nod, then rolled the window up and drove away. I haven't seen her since. The shed still stands. No citations, no visits, no envelopes. The county formally amended the Maple Ridge boundary maps and posted them online with a disclaimer. No external properties under HOA jurisdiction. And across the street, where the old HOA sign used to hang, there's a new one now. Simple white letters on a blue background, Community Watch. No affiliation. We made sure of that. The first time I saw Patricia again after the charges, she was standing in line at the county clerk's office, wearing a stiff gray suit and sunglasses that belonged to a different decade. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. By then, everything was already in motion. 2 weeks earlier, a forensic accountant assigned to the case had discovered something that changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. A line item buried in the HOA's expense reports labeled Strategic Property Solutions Consultation Services. It wasn't the vendor's name that raised red flags, it was the address it was billed to. It was my address. When the DA's office subpoenaed the associated records, they found a disturbing paper trail: invoices for compliance enforcement, perimeter influence, and a $3,750 charge for on-site deterrent application. That was the night my shed had been vandalized. It was official now. The HOA hadn't just tolerated the harassment, they'd paid for it. The DA secured indictments not just for Patricia, but for 2 other former board members. Their names hadn't surfaced publicly yet, but I recognized them when they were arrested. The man who'd sat silently at the emergency meeting, and the woman who'd once scowled at my mailbox like it owed her money. But what really escalated things was the discovery of the private investigator. His name was Vincent Rayner, a retired city code enforcement officer turned consultant. The HOA had hired him off the books through the fake firm Patricia funneled HOA money into. He was the one who delivered the fake map, the red spray paint, and, as it turned out, had been the one flying the drone that Elliot had mentioned. Patricia hadn't flown it herself. She'd paid someone who knew how to avoid detection. Rayner was picked up in a neighboring county on unrelated charges, possession of counterfeit permit tags. When they searched his vehicle, they found a folder with photos of my property, Jared's home, and 4 other houses in the area, all involved in the HOA's previous enforcement efforts. The sheriff's department linked him to over a dozen intimidation attempts across the state, most tied to rogue HOAs trying to pressure outlying properties into folding under their jurisdiction. What set this case apart was the depth of coordination and the money trail. When the charges landed, the local media went into a frenzy. Channel 4 Investigates ran a follow-up segment titled "The HOA That Went Too Far." It aired footage of the arrests, interviews with residents who'd been pressured into paying illegal fines, and a panel discussion with legal experts explaining how the HOA had fabricated authority over properties they never governed. One of the experts, a real estate attorney named Leila Grant, summed it up perfectly on air. They attempted to construct a shadow jurisdiction. They used forged documents, false filings, and hired intimidation to create the illusion of authority. That's not just unethical. That's criminal. And it was criminal. The final list of charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of community funds, falsifying municipal records, unlawful surveillance, and criminal mischief. The trial was scheduled for early spring, But by January, 2 of the defendants had taken plea deals. They handed over email chains, transaction records, and even a recording of a private meeting where Patricia had outlined a strategy for long-term control over border properties. Her own words became the nails in her legal coffin. In one recording, she said, "Once they think they're part of the HOA, even if they're not, they'll act like it. That's all we need. Perception is stronger than paperwork." The prosecution played that audio in court. The jury didn't take long. Patricia was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 4. The 2 board members who cooperated received reduced sentences, 18 months in county jail and 5 years of probation. Rayner, the so-called enforcement consultant, got 10 years. His history of harassment across multiple counties sealed his fate, but the damage they caused wasn't just legal. It was personal. Neighbors who'd quietly paid illegal fines came forward. One couple had been pressured into repainting their entire house twice. Another had sold their home and moved after threats of escalating dues they were never even obligated to pay. The county council moved swiftly. They passed a resolution mandating that all HOAs submit annual jurisdiction maps for public review, certified by County Land Services. Any attempt to enforce rules outside those boundaries would be treated as a zoning violation and referred directly to the DA's office. A task force was created to review every HOA in the region. Within 2 months, 6 other associations were flagged for overreach, though none as extreme as Maple Ridge. As for the neighborhood, it changed. Residents who'd once kept to themselves began meeting informally at the local park. People shared stories, compared documents, and offered help. Jared led a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. He collected over 70% of the required signatures within a month. By April, Maple Ridge HOA was officially disbanded. The clubhouse, once their command center, was converted into a shared community space. It got a new coat of paint, and the old metal letters that once read Maple Ridge Association Hall were taken down and replaced with a wooden sign carved by a local artisan. The Ridge House open to all. I was standing there the day they held the first community barbecue. The shed was visible from the road, still intact, still legal. A few people stopped to admire it. One man asked how I'd managed to keep it through everything. "I didn't back down," I said. "That's all." He nodded slowly. "Glad you didn't." None of us knew how bad it was until you pushed back. I didn't say anything else. I just handed him a plate of ribs and watched kids run through the yard where a drone had once hovered. In the weeks that followed, the DA's office reached out and asked if I'd be willing to speak at a regional homeowners summit about HOA overreach and legal protections for residents. I agreed. Not because I planned to make a career out of it, but because people needed to know it could happen to them, that it had happened. The summit drew over 200 attendees. I spoke for 15 minutes, showed the fake annexation map, the fake citations, and the final court ruling. At the end, someone asked me what advice I'd give to anyone dealing with an aggressive HOA. "Know your property lines," I said. "Know your rights, and document everything. If someone's bluffing, they're counting on you to fold before you realize the cards are fake." The room applauded. Not for me, really for the fact that the system had worked, even if it took a fight to make it happen. I went home that night and added a new motion light above the shed just because I could. No one's challenged it since. And across the street, where Patricia once stood taking photos like she was scouting enemy territory, there's now a little free library built by the neighborhood kids. Inside, someone left a copy of the county land code with a sticky note on the cover, in case anyone forgets who's really in charge.